Dear listeners, I'm thrilled to announce you can now pre-order the paperback edition of our book, Think Like a Vegan. This highly anticipated release will be available in the UK and worldwide from January 2025 and in North America from April 2025. It'll contain a new afterword, so you can dive into updates and new material you won't find in the hardcover. Don't miss out on this opportunity to enhance your understanding and commitment to veganism. Pre-order your copy today wherever you buy books or on Amazon or Target, and join us in thinking, living, and thriving like a vegan.
This is another iRaw podcast.
Hi, I'm Emilia Leese, and welcome to the latest episode of Think Like a Vegan podcast, a companion to our book also entitled Think Like a Vegan. In this episode, we're going to do something a little different because with me today is friend and previous guest, Benny Malone. He joined me in season 1 in the episode entitled Discussing Veganism with Others, where Benny talks about his top 5 fallacies that vegan encounters when talking with others. And I talk about my top 3 tips when engaging with others about veganism. And so far, that's the number 1 episode of this podcast. The inspiration for this particular episode came when I saw one of Benny's social media posts about what people should say to vegans instead of the usual excuses that we hear. And I really liked that take because it shifts the perspective of the dialogue. So I knew I wanted to hear more, and I invited him back to the podcast to elaborate. Welcome back, Benny. It's great to have you on here again.
Hi, Emmy. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me back. I listened to the whole first series. I thought it was brilliant. So thanks for having me back.
That's very kind of you. And in case you haven't listened to the episode in season 1 and you don't know Benny Malone, he's the author of How to Argue with Vegans, an analysis of anti-vegan arguments. And it's a masterclass in all the fallacies one could ever fathom arising with respect to questioning the validity of veganism, whether made in good or bad faith. If you don't have his book, just go get it. Benny is a vegan animal rights author from the UK. He's an autodidact in science, nature, and philosophy. And if there's a book about veganism out there, he's read it cover to cover. So we're here to talk about what non-vegans might choose to say in an ideal world to vegans instead of either the usual arguments, the excuses, the what about, and the self-projecting defensiveness, if I can say that, and so on. So you had a post, Benny, some time ago that really captured my attention and my imagination. And it said, it was something to the effect, what should non-vegans say to vegans? And I really liked it. And you had a little list, and whether we talk about the same things or not, I don't know. But and I thought, I really liked it because it encourages an interruption of the usual dynamic. So I'm really looking forward to you and I talking about this and talking it through. So if there's any non-vegans rather, out there listening, and you have vegan friends, some of these things that we are going to talk about today are some of the things you might choose to say to your vegan friends next time you see them. So let's go. Here we go. So Benny, in an ideal world, instead of the usual shenanigans, what would you like to hear from non-vegans? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
First thing that comes to mind for me would be, as vegans, I think we want to talk about the animals. We don't really want to talk about ourselves. Especially for me, I don't want to really be talking about myself. I want to talk about the animals, animal rights. You know, there's the dark side of what happens to animals, how they're commodified, and that's the reality, and that has to be faced up to, and maybe people don't realise what's happening. So a bit of humility there as well. In like, you know, we've all had to learn. It's been a learning curve, quite sharp for a lot of us. And actually finding out. The humility to think, well, I didn't know that. I'm actually going to learn about it now. And also thinking vegans know how to be vegan better than a non-vegan does, so there's that humility as well. So I think for me, I'd rather be talking about animals and maybe animals on sanctuaries to see what animals are really like, what their personalities are really like when they're allowed to be themselves. That's the sort of things I want to be talking about, rather than why do vegans want their food to be shaped like chicken nuggets, that sort of thing.
I'll comment on the whole thing, but before I forget, I saw today a meme that said, it was along the lines of why do vegans want their food shaped like whatever meat product? And it was like, well, why do non-vegans want salami shaped like cucumbers?
Yeah.
And I thought that was really it tickled my sense of humor. No, but you're right. There's that humility and that saying, and I think your first point, I found your post again, and it said, thanks for highlighting this issue. I had no idea. Like that acknowledgement that it's okay if you didn't know, because I didn't know. I didn't know what happened to dairy cows. I mean, I should have known, right? Because it's sort of a logical thing. They are mammals. So obviously, there needs to be birth and pregnancy if there's going to be lactation. But it never occurred to me. And it occurred to me, in my 40s. Ridiculous. But here we are. So like, it's okay not to know instead of being defensive. So I like that, the humility. And I like, too, the talking about the animals and what their personalities or what they're like or how, and because we don't necessarily think about them, and I mean, in general, we don't think about them as individuals, as non-objects that are there for us to take from. And so I like that. I like that a lot. What else? I'm looking at your post, and I like them all.
Yeah, so that list, I think I'd forgotten about it until you mentioned it again. But as usual with me, I try and come a little bit left field with turning things around as well. So instead of, it being, this is what vegans should be answering to all these questions, it was trying to look at it a bit askew, kind of, well, instead of like how to argue with vegans, this time it was how to talk to vegans and what we as vegans might like to hear, and that sort of thing, with a bit of humor as well, because it was all like, oh, thank you for letting me know about this. It was all really things that we never hear of what we would like to.
It's true. It's true. This is another one I liked. So you said, thanks for caring about my children's future on a habitable planet. I love that. And I love that. How did you come to that one? I mean, obviously I can think of lots of the obvious ways of how you came up with that, but because you went to the environmental issue and you said, let me turn this around. And I love that. I love that process.
Well, I think at the stage we are in society, I think vegans are only hated more than drug addicts, I think, in some surveys. So our social capital is pretty low, so it'd be nice to get thanked sometimes for actually choosing the least carbon intensive foods and that type of thing. But again, it's something we're not likely to hear from people. It's always going to be about the rainforest and soy, and then we have to bring out the facts about soy and that type of thing. So
I know,
it's really, if people want an argument, the arguments are there, but it'd just be good if they kind of realise the facts first, and then, we could actually get talking about banking us, really.
Yeah. I agree. No, you're right, because then we have to be sort of geopolitical experts and farming experts, and obviously we're nutritional experts. Obviously, we're also doctors and nutritionists. We've gone to med school and nutritional school at night after work, and all of that, which is always amusing. When you're having a conversation with somebody, or how might we turn it around so that it can become a positive instead of us always answering the question? Do you think there's a way to do that?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because maybe both sides become defensive because you feel like you're being interrogated. And I think when you said about the interruption, it is kind of, you have to kind of terminate that somewhere. And I remember Sherry Kolb's book, I was discussing this the other day, and with my friend Priya, and we say, it feels like you're getting 20 questions. We were talking about socializing as vegans on Twitter.
Yeah.
And not socializing on Twitter, but the conversation was on Twitter because I don't do much socializing on Twitter now. But
God, no.
yeah, so it was, you feel like you're being interrogated, and then you kind of have to think, well, why am I being asked 20 questions here and being put on the spot? And I think at some point you have to say, well, I'd be happy to answer these questions, but maybe not right now. And you get a kind of sense for it as a vegan as well. Maybe the longer you've been vegan, who is coming at it from a place of good faith and who is really just trying to interrogate you or go for that gotcha question and try and pin you into
Absolutely.
a corner. So what Sherry talked about was, mind if I ordered the cheeseburger? That kind of question.
I was going to mention that. That's a great book.
Yeah. So it was kind of, to me, that is kind of a really awkward question, especially at the dinner table, because it's kind of looking for your permission as well. They're looking for your approval as a vegan, and it's kind of almost trying to trick you into giving approval when they know really you're not going to give approval to consuming animal products, but it's kind of looking for that approval.
Yeah, approval and absolution.
Yeah. When we find out about animal agriculture, I think we have those kind of 5 stages of grief, is it? I think, or I don't know if it was 7 and then they made it 4, but it's kind of like denial. So this isn't really happening. That can't be happening to animals. And I think we've all been through these stages. Maybe they happen quickly, maybe they happen over a longer time. But, it's not happening. And then, so there's the denial. Then there's the kind of bargaining. Well, actually, it can't be that bad. So you say, well, actually, it's humane, or the animals get a good deal out of it. So all that kind of humane labelling is the bargaining stage. Then there's the kind of acceptance, which I think is going vegan, where you accept it is happening and you accept responsibility as well, and that you can do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think getting to that, getting over those various stages is tough for some people. Well, even getting to stage 1, for that matter. And I think I just want to mention the book again, just so people know. It's Sherry Kolb's book called "Mind If I Order the Cheeseburger," and it's a really great both introduction and, I think basically it's great for everybody at any point in time, whether you're a new vegan or a veteran vegan. I think it's a really great book, and she's she's somebody I very much still look up to, and it's a sad loss that she's gone so soon. So this brings me to your next point. That was exactly that. Thanks for creating awareness of how animals are commodified and exploited, and that. It's obvious. It's sort of like, yes, obviously, but saying it really, because if you say that, you're also acknowledging your own, from a non-vegan perspective, to say that, you're acknowledging your own part in that exploitation and commodification. and I think that's really important because of what you were just saying. It's a stage you have to go through, acknowledging, well, gosh, yeah, I am part of that, and I can do something about it.
Yeah, with the animal personalities as well, it's like the commodification is the animal, exploitation industries try to make these kind of clone animals that are, like fungible commodities, all interchangeable. And there's that kind of replaceability argument as well, where you can, one animal can be killed and then they can just be replaced by another. But this is kind of trying to bring awareness to animals as unique individuals. And I think that's a big part of the awareness we're trying to raise. That animals aren't fungible commodities that can just be replaced, which is something Peter Singer says they can be, but really that's the utility that is getting replaced. You can never really compensate for the loss of the individual. So I think what we're trying to raise awareness of is that they are unique individuals. And like I say, with the sanctuaries,
exactly,
that's where you really see it. Yeah.
Exactly. And trying to change that perspective from something that is object oriented to something that is individual oriented. Just like we wouldn't say, oh, people dying, who cares, there's more. We would never say something like that. That's just ghastly. And changing that perspective to have it apply, having that concept of uniqueness and value, having it apply to everyone, to all sentient beings. And I think that is really important, but that is also the most challenging thing. And I think if somebody is self-aware enough and comfortable enough to have a conversation and said, wow, gosh, I never thought of it that way. You've really given me a lot to think about here. Thanks for doing that. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, whether they ultimately become vegan or not, it's already a tremendous shift. So yeah, I think that's really key. The next one was, I love this one too. Actually, it's the last one, but then I'll go back to the other one. So thanks for educating on the environmental impact of animal agriculture. You'd have to be a science denialist to think you could somehow eat from higher trophic levels and circumvent the second law of thermodynamics. Honestly, I would perish immediately right there if somebody said that in a conversation. I would. It would be incredible, but also, yeah, literally.
Well, a lot of the arguments do boil down to this, to the trophic level kind of and feed conversion ratios, because and the fact that you can't really get around it. So all the harvest death arguments, even what about plants though? A lot of them do come down to that efficiency, or rather the inefficiency of siphoning, calories through animals first, rather than just eating plants directly. And all the kind of ways that try and find loopholes tend to be those arguments in the grey areas. So people will talk about consuming roadkill, or, a lot of the bivalve kind of discussion as well is kind of circumventing that thing where you have to feed animals first. But if people, really were avoiding the main way animal agriculture operates, which is that what we were talking about with trying to make all these fungible animals to then just be replaced again, and feeding all of them, and a lot of the harvesting. And I think with the harvest deaths as well, a really neglected area is silage and the actual amount of harvesting that gets done even for grass-fed animals. And some of the reading I've been doing recently is mowing grass is a lot more lethal to small animals than harvesting crops and grains, because the mowers are always a bit lower And I've seen farmers discussing this as well. So all that grass is cut for winter feed, but you never see that mentioned in harvester kind of arguments. So again, you can't get around the fact that you're still feeding animals, even if they're so-called grass-fed. They're still cutting grass. Still a lot of harvesting goes on. And actually a lot of them are just grass kind of finished anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always, there's this harvest deaths and all of that, but it's like, well, but it's also, all these environments have blighted biodiversity entirely, and they themselves become these sort of, whether it's just grain or whether it's just grass silage that will be fed, they're just these monocultures, and themselves they engender the decrease of biodiversity. And so themselves, whether there's an actual death there, it's actually the existence of these that's preventing more life. And that's an argument, not even an argument, but it's often something that people don't really think about. They are not focusing on it. I mean, they're starting to some extent, but actually cutting grass, cutting grass and mowing the lawn in general, it's one of my pet peeves of life. And cutting the lawn in lawns and housing and in homes all over the world. And it's this sort of just the daftest use of resources that has ever existed,
like golf courses.
Golf courses, but just even just your lawn in front of your house, and in some countries it's a lot more than others. But like what is that? We don't need that when we're putting in all these resources to cut these grasses, when we could leave the grasses be and create and generate more environments for lots of little animals and insects and all sorts of beings to run around in, and not have this super neat lawn that we really don't need, but that a lot of times it's also, you have to have by law in certain housing associations and certain neighborhoods. I guess it's a little bit different in the UK, but you have these rules. So you have to have your grass cut in tiny, fraction of its existence, that you have to have grass at all. But that's another, that's a little pet peeve of mine. And so let me ask you this. Has anyone ever said something like that to you?
No, never. I don't think. But the closest you get is what I call kind of distancing. And that's, you'll get kind of backhanded compliments and praise, but as a way of creating distance from veganism again. So instead of being outright insulted and ridiculed, they'll actually say, wow, it's really admirable what you're doing. I could never do that though. And, you must be some sort of saint or monk to be able to do that. But again, that's not what we want to hear. We don't want to hear that we're kind of special and doing something really out of the ordinary. And again, it kind of feeds into that, that myth of vegans think they're superior and better. Whereas the answer to that is, if we really thought that, why would we want everyone to be vegan? We want everyone else to be able to do what we're doing. We don't want to be special and isolated and put on a pedestal. So it might sound like you're praising us, but it's another thing we don't want to hear. We'd rather hear, that is something I'll think about, and maybe I'll start looking into it more, rather than saying, wow, you're doing something really out of the ordinary and special, and you must have amazing willpower. Well, not really.
No, not at all for me. I guess vegans are the most unexclusive club ever created, because the whole point is as many vegans as possible. So, so there's definitely no exclusivity there whatsoever.
Yeah. It's like the opposite of Fight Club.
Yes, exactly. Although it kind of always ends up as Fight Club because you're going to have to argue this or that.
Yeah. If it's your first night as a vegan, you must argue.
Well, let's just take a quick break here and we'll come back and have more. We'll pause for a musical interlude, after which we'll return with more from Benny Malone. This is Matthew Gerstenberger's Genderon. It's the only piece he's included this season which has significant component of modular synthesis, which is a slightly different way of making music and is just pure fun. Find all of Matthew's music as Seismicity on SoundCloud. We're back for more with Benny Malone and I talking about what we should be saying to vegans. Well, really, what non-vegans should be saying to vegans. Obviously, the thing that I would definitely like to hear and that I'd love to hear is, I've gone vegan, or I've become vegan. That's always fantastic. Although, are you hesitant when somebody says that to you? Or is it just me?
I am a little, just because I've kind of learned to distrust people's understanding of veganism a little bit. So, yeah, I'll be a little bit skeptical now. And because I know that family members as well have told me that they're really cutting down and, they're going to really make a good effort. But then I'll go around the house and it's not really happening, Because I think they're saying it to me to please me, So there's another thing. We don't really want to just be pleased by what you're saying. What we want is action, really.
Yeah. Oh, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and the disappointment is disappointment. We don't need further disappointment. No one needs disappointment if it can be avoided. And and sometimes I feel like that too. Sometimes I get a little, when somebody says that, I'm excited, but I'm always very guarded in some ways, just because I don't want to then be disappointed. And I'm happy that they're doing it, and I'm happy that they've made that change. And I always make myself available for questions and discussions, whatever the case. But yeah, there's always that little bit of trepidation that, oh gosh, please, let this stick.
Yeah. But another myth as well is that this kind of myth of the all or nothing and the perfect is the enemy of the good, which I talk a bit about in my book. So I think a lot of the reducitarians kind of came up with this, that vegans aren't happy unless, you go vegan overnight and, you're completely vegan as soon as you talk to someone. Realistically, we know that one conversation I have with someone might plant a seed, and then someone else might say something later on, and then they might go vegan. But to expect someone to go vegan straight away from one conversation, but it also gives you a bit of hope in that a lot of groundwork might have been laid previously by other vegans or things that they've read and heard. And then you might give them that last bit of information that they need. And I think if we look at even ourselves going vegan, there was probably a lot under the surface there. and then one little bit of information, maybe something you found out about the dairy industry or the egg industry, that could have been the final piece of information you needed just to push you over the edge a bit. So rather than having to provide every bit of information about veganism at once, just the bit you are providing could be enough. And it's that kind of cumulative effects then. But also this myth that we won't be happy.
I agree with that.
Whereas I think we are happy if people say they are reducing, but we're still clear about the goal being veganism and that animals are individuals that shouldn't be commodified. But we can certainly say, oh, you know, I'm happy that you are reducing your meat and dairy intake because that is a step towards the goal. But it doesn't mean we settle for that or kind of approve of.
Exactly. It's not settling or approve of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you say, aiming lower. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right. I think the point is this idea that we aren't happy unless you become vegan overnight is absurd, because that certainly doesn't enter my consciousness when I'm talking with somebody. I'm sharing information with them as best as I can. And I'm sharing knowledge and things that I've learned, things that I've worked out, or whatever it is, considerations I've made, difficult situations that I've been in, whatever the thing is, and more to show what it's like to exist as a vegan, and to say, well, look, if I am doing it, maybe you can too, and you know, we can't unscrew someone's head and make scrambles and change their behavior or change their minds. We can only communicate as best we can. And I think as long as we keep the focus on animals and on the ethics, I think that's really all that we can do. And so for me, the thing that I would really like to hear from people, actually, what I would just simply prefer a very clear, I don't care about anyone else. I don't care about animals. I care about what I like and what I want. And that's it. Intellectually, that's a lot more honest, and emotionally too. It's also self-aware, and I'd have a certain amount of respect for that, because there's a clarity to that. I mean, I like to know who my enemies are, quote unquote. I'm using that very broadly. I don't mean it literally, but I like to know where people are coming from, instead of an ambiguous thing. But that's me. Because that would also, I think, they might truly believe that they don't care, and for some might be absolutely the case. But I wonder if then they would step back and say, well, gosh, but I do care about some, you know, a charismatic animal that they really like, or about their animal at home, their cat, their dog, whatever. So I wonder about that. But then again, there might just be some people saying, I just don't care. I want what I want, and I don't want to be bothered. Okay, well, that's okay, I suppose, because that is actual reality. I mean, I wouldn't like it, but whether I like someone's stance on a moral issue has nothing to do with the truth of the moral issue itself. It would just simply be a much more candid and productive exchange, I think, because it would just sort of clear the air. And I'd really like that. For the record, no, I have never had anyone say that to me. Not a soul, not ever. Has anyone ever said that to you?
Only in Facebook debate groups. And even then, it was suspicious.
Yeah.
That, you know, you don't actually care about any animal or what happens to the environment, or even the state of public health, people getting a lot of diseases from animal agriculture, from air pollution, the biggest causes of air pollution and that type of thing. It's very rare you'll find someone that really will kind of die on that hill. People generally do care about something, or at least circle of friends and family. So it's a good way of knowing who to avoid, though.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think, as you said, I think saying that to a person face to face would take, and that's what I mean, a certain amount of intellectual and emotional honesty that I don't think translates to social media necessarily. Certainly not, because there's a different type of interaction often that can be had in certain places. Well, and in social media in general, you can have the interaction. It's not genuine, and you can take these more sort of extreme positions or nihilist positions or whatever, because you don't have to face the person, and you don't have to you don't have to interact with them in real life, and that, I think, makes a difference, because saying something like that in real life, it's a lot stronger, and it would, and to some extent would be powerful too, because it would absolutely make your position known, clear, and the dynamic would immediately change.
The story I like to use for any kind of nihilists is Keith Moon, the drummer of The Who, goes and meets some punks in a punk club, and he's talking to this one, and Keith knocks this drink out of the hand of one of the punks, and the punk is like, "Oi, what'd you do that for?" This is after the punk's been talking about he doesn't care about anything, doesn't care about anyone.
Yeah.
And then Keith knocks the drink out of his hand, and then he's like, "What'd you do that for?" And he's like, "I thought you didn't care about anything." So people do care about something.
Yeah, they care about what they want to care about at that moment in time. So there isn't this I don't care. It's the same when people say, "Well, I wouldn't care if this was done to me," blah blah blah. It's like, well, that's because it's not literally being done to you. If it were being done to you, you would care immediately. And I think that step is often, people don't want to talk about that, don't want to think about that, because they don't have to. But if we can put ourselves, if we can put ourselves in other people's shoes, that actually does help in at least changing the way we might behave towards others, and in this case, how we might think about changing our relationship with animals. Is there anything else that you want to mention today?
Yeah, I was just going to say to that point as well, I think suffering is kind of a great equalizer, because, it brings like all the fantasies down to earth really as well. I mean, at the moment we've got all these kind of artificial intelligence kind of fantasies, and are we living in a simulation? But when you bring it back down to kind of suffering, it's kind of, whether it's a simulation or not, we're still suffering. So, and that's still the reality. That's still the experience that we're having, and it still matters whether that's a simulation or not. So in that way, I think it gets rid of a lot of the nonsense as well. Yeah, that's
really good. I like that a lot. Irrespective of whether it's real, we're still suffering. We're still experiencing it. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it is a great equalizer if you can perceive it that way, and if you can see how it affects other people and how it might affect you, without a doubt. Well, before we go, any projects that you're working on or anything that you want to tell us about?
Well, I'm putting the finishing touches to my second book at the moment. I was writing an introduction to that. So it's not too exciting. It's going to be a collection of all the articles I've written over the last 10 years. So I think I don't know my exact veganiversary. I think it was maybe the end of 2013. So it's going to be at least a decade of writing about veganism. And like I say, I'm just writing the introduction. I've got all the articles collected together. I was writing one on the bivalve issue. Then I kind of got a bit demoralised on that whole issue with kind of the lack of reasonable thought about that issue. And people seeming not to think that they have a nervous system or, you know, so I've been doing a lot of reading, and then I decided to, you know, cover it again. So I am going to add an article on that because I'm reading a lot about the nervous system, and there's a lot of kind of contradictory stuff in the literature as well. Because for snails, they will say 3 pairs of ganglion class as a brain, but when it comes to oysters, they'll say those same 3 pairs of ganglion aren't a brain, whereas they're performing the same function for the oyster. So, and then there's all these really bad analogies as well that people have been using between oysters and dismembered fingers and spinal cords, and it's really, it's kind of baffled me at first.
So oysters are like a severed finger? Is that the analogy that they're making?
Yeah, essentially, because a severed finger has ganglion, and if you say, well, I give oysters the benefit of the doubt because they have ganglia and neurons, they will come out with this kind of name the trait argument where they'll come up with some entity that has those traits as well, and then they'll be looking for a symmetry breaker between the two. So I said it's the fact that one's an organism kind of in the world that's evolved, and you can't just single out one trait and isolate it and then say that, well, you know, it's because both have got neurons. That's not really the whole argument anyway, just the actual presence of neurons. It's more like, is it enough kind of a neural substrate for sentience? And I think it's there is enough there to definitely give me pause for thought before I would eat them. So that's all I'm really trying to get
there's
across.
some, you know, if you're thinking about it philosophically, it's the Tom Regan point of subject of a life. Simple as, we don't have to sit here and figure out the science about it. They're still a subject of a life to themselves.
Yeah, I think with the ganglion, there's enough kind of integration there, and the processing the information. Their bodies are completely innervated with nerve fibers. There's serotonin. There's all sorts of chemicals.
That's incredible.
Lots of reactions going on. So the reading I've been doing is quite extensive. So I'm just hoping to boil that down, really. So that's what's been taking up most of my time at the moment.
That's incredible. Is there a particular fact that has that really blew you away?
Well, I have I have vacillated a little bit on it, because sometimes you'll think, well, there isn't enough there that could possibly support sentience, but then I'll read something else and think, well, there could be. So it's just, I kind of do go back and forth, but that back and forth in itself is enough reason to just leave them alone. So for me, that's enough. Plus, the amount of nonsense that's written about the environmental benefits, whereas oyster reefs would be beneficial if they're just left alone, because then that provides habitat and kind of a break against tidal erosion and everything, and all things like that. When they're just left alone, the farming aspect of it isn't exactly the same. You've still got these rope lines, and they still do dredging. Yeah. But the way the people are really in favour of it kind of cover over all this, and will say that they haven't got a nervous system or anything representing that could be analogous to a brain at all, is really just totally glossing over it. So I'm just trying to redress the balance to give people a bit of a pause for thought, really.
I'm looking forward to that.
I'm not saying anything certain about it. Just enough to give you pause for thought.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to that article, and I'm looking forward to your second book. So we'll have to have you back on when that happens, maybe in series 4.
Yeah, definitely.
And anything else?
I can't think of anything else.
Maybe you should start a Substack.
I should start one, yeah.
You have enough material.
Yeah. Actually, I think I will.
Anyway,
yeah.
No, you really should, because that way everything is in one place. But everything will be in one place in your new book. So thank you again, Benny. And it's always a pleasure chatting with you, and look forward to seeing you here again.
Thanks so much, Emi. Thanks for having me back. And I look forward to hearing all the other episodes in the new series. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Benny.
We burn things up when we go round. We speed things up when we go round.
That's it from me, Emi Leese. Thank you for listening. Remember, you can get in touch by email at thinklikeaveganbook@gmail.com. You can find more of my work and upcoming events on my website, emilialeese.com, and social media. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with others, and leave us a review. And buy a copy of Think Like a Vegan anywhere you buy books and audiobooks, or request it from your local library. Production credit goes to Jim Moore of Bloody Vegans Productions. Theme music provided by Jenny Moore's Mystic Business from the eponymous album. The opening tune is Flashbacks, and we close with Tear Things Up. The interval music is by Matthew Gerstenberger, aka Seismicity, on SoundCloud.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.